Okay, welcome guys. This is show number 5, episode number 5 of Our Take Live, and what I want to talk to you guys tonight is about the stages of grief, and it's something that I went through several times last year, and I think one time this year. Stages of grief, basically, that can be in relations to the death of a loved one, or even the death of a pet or an animal or any other living person or animal or anything like that you lose that really means a lot to you in your life and everything. So, we talk about the stages of grief that supposedly everybody goes through, everybody must go through, I guess, in order to finally resolve the situation in their life. And just to be honest or whatever, I mean, you never really get over the death of a loved one, a human being loved one. It could be a father, a mother, a sister, a brother. You never really get over it, but time really kind of helps out, as time passes by. Let's also talk about pets too, because I've had several pets that passed away. One of our beloved dogs, got ran over last year, late last year, and it was a very traumatic experience. For that pet to die on us and everything. It was a very traumatic experience. So, and I found myself really going through the stages of grief with our beloved pet that got killed, that ran over by a car, and then so let's talk a little bit about the 5 stages of grief and really how that came about and everything. So the 5 stages of grief were identified initially by um, Miss Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote the 5 stages of grief. Kind of detailed and laid out the natural feelings that people feel as a whole or whatever, pretty much. I mean, you don't necessarily have to go through all the 5 stages of grief in the order that they're listed, but a lot of people do go through those stages in different orders or whatever. So what I want to do tonight is I want to talk about those 5 stages of grief. Maybe you can kind of recognize some of those stages, how they kind of interplay in your life, because I know that you have lost loved ones, be it a pet on the low end of it, or an actual human being loved one, a relative or a friend or whatever. And so let's talk about the 5 stages of grief. The stages of mourning and grief are universal, and they are experienced by people from all walks of life. Mourning occurs in response to an individual's own terminal illness, the loss of a close relationship, or to the death of a valued being, human or an animal. There are 5 stages of normal grief that were first proposed by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her 1969 book on death and dying. And so she pretty much laid out these 5 stages of grieving, and I'm going to go over them. And later, keep in mind, later in life, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross really kind of regretted that she presented the stages of grief like this and the way they were, the way that they came across to a lot of people, because a lot of people really kind of thought that they had to go through these stages, maybe even in a certain order or whatever. But no, you don't have to go through all the stages of grief for any length of time or at all, really. And they don't have to really, especially be in the order that they're presented. But a lot of times they do follow a logical order. And I found myself, like I said, after losing my beloved pet last year, and 2 other family members we lost last year too, and those are more important, of course. And I did go through a lot of the stages. So let's go to number 1. Once again, the stages of grief. Okay, number 1 is pretty much denial, or denial and isolation. I remember when our dog, case in point, got ran over last year. I mean, it's like I could not believe this has happened. I said, this cannot happen. Even though I did have some premonitions about our dog getting killed, because he always liked to run out. He always would leave the house as soon as the door was open. He'd take off running, and I just knew that one day he was going to get hit by a car. And lo and behold, it happened. He got hit by a car, and so once again, denial and isolation. The first reaction to learning of a terminal illness or death of a cherished loved one is really to deny the reality of the situation. It's a normal reaction to rationalize overwhelming emotions. It's a defense mechanism that buffers the immediate shock. We block out the words and we hide from the facts. This is a temporary response that carries us through the first wave of pain. And it really does that. I mean, it'll carry you through the first wave of pain. Sometimes your mind just cannot process something so tragic that a loved one actually died, especially when it's unexpected. It's a little bit easier whenever they go through a terminal illness, and you can kind of prepare yourself for the eventual passing of that person or animal. But when it happens suddenly, um, the first reaction really is most of the time is just to deny that it actually happened. Like, oh no, I can't believe it. No, no, no. I remember when a good friend of mine from church got killed in an industrial accident back in the 90s. And I remember hearing the news whenever he got killed tragically in an accident. Yeah, I said, there's just no way. I just remember just falling on my bed and just saying, there's no way, no, no, no. That's all I could say was just no. There's just no way. I was denying that my friend had actually got killed. You know, let's take it on down to step number 2, and the second stage in um, the stages of grief is anger. A lot of people experience anger. As the masking effects of denial and isolation begin to wear, the reality and its pain reemerge. We're not ready. The intense emotion is deflected from our vulnerable core, redirected and expressed instead as anger. The anger may be aimed at an inanimate object, complete strangers, friends, or family. Anger may be directed at our dying or deceased loved one. Rationally, we know the person is not to be blamed. Emotionally, however, we may resent that person for causing us pain or leaving us. We feel guilty for being angry, and this makes us more angry. I mean, that happens in a lot of suicidal situations. I mean, I've been there a lot of times where suicide has happened. Being with my profession as a paramedic, and in the past as a coroner, um, I see a lot of anger develop out of a person who committed suicide. I mean, and for the suicidal people out there, you just have to know that your problem is it's temporary. It's not permanent. So we always say that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And you think about, when you commit suicide, think of the loved ones that you leave behind, and the extreme emotional torment and pain they're going through as a result of a suicide of a loved one. That we see anger come out of those situations a whole lot too. So, and the third step in the grief process would be bargaining. Okay. The normal reaction to feelings of helplessness and vulnerability is often a need to regain control. If only we had sought medical attention sooner, if only we had got a second opinion from another doctor, if only we had tried to be a better person toward them. And I remember, like, case in point, when our dog got ran over, it's like, if only, we just could have stopped him from getting out the house this one last time. Just you can't change the past. You can only try to bargain, but it's just like a natural, reaction that comes out of you, whatever. And let's see here. And we'll go to the next one right here. Depression. Okay. And I remember for me, the depression was a kind of a delayed response that I had. I would find myself just going about my business and everything, and all of a sudden just start crying pretty much. I mean, just the fact that my beloved pet got ran over, and how much love he was to us, it just really hit me so hard and everything. I would just start crying as I was driving. So I was really depressed. The depression kind of kicked in a little bit ways down the road, because you have to process the severity of what happened. It takes a little bit of time to fully process everything. In the moment, whenever something initially happens, when a person dies or animal dies, you just cannot process all the information. It takes a little bit of time for your mind to kind of work everything out, and then those feelings of deep depression really kind of start setting in. All the times where that person would have been with you for a birthday party, for Christmas gatherings, for Thanksgiving, all those important parts of life that person normally would have been with you. You experience life with them. They're not there anymore. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time for the depression part to kind of start hanging in there and start coming in and getting you down. The two types of depression that are associated with mourning. The first one is a reaction to practical implications regarding relating to loss. The sadness and regret predominate this type of depression. We worry about the cost and the burial. We worry that in our grief, we have spent less time with others that depend on us. This phase may be eased by simple clarification and reassurance. We may need a bit of helpful cooperation and a few kind words. The second type of depression is more subtle. In a sense, it's perhaps more private. It is our quiet preparation to separate and to bid our loved ones farewell. Sometimes all we really need is a big hug. And hey, look, if you haven't recently, um, experienced the loss of a loved one or an animal, a beloved pet recently, maybe you can help somebody else that you know that has or whatever. Just kind of be a helping hand toward them. Understand that, hey, if they get angry, it's not necessarily personal towards you. It's just part of the grieving process that happens and everything. And the last step of the grieving process, as outlined by Ms. Ross, is five, which is acceptance. And keep in mind that these are in no particular order, but acceptance usually does come, if it ever does come, it comes later down the road. Wait, sometimes weeks, months, sometimes years and years and years. Um, and of course, acceptance. This stage of mourning it's not a gift that's afforded to everybody. Death may be sudden and unexpected, or we may never see beyond our anger or denial. It is not necessarily a mark of bravery to resist the inevitable and to deny ourselves the opportunity to make our peace. This phrase is marked by withdrawal and calm. This phase, it's not a period of happiness, and it must be distinguished from depression. I always say that time heals, maybe not all wounds, but time kind of heals most wounds, and that's true to a certain extent. As time goes by, if you lost a loved one, time does actually make it a little bit easier to deal with, losing a loved one and everything. Um, Loved ones that are terminally ill or aging appear to go through a final period of withdrawal. This is by no means a suggestion that they are aware of their own impending death or such, only that physical decline may be sufficient to produce a similar response. Their behavior implies it is natural to reach a stage at which social interaction is limited. The dignity and grace shown by our dying loved ones may well be their last gift to us. Coping with loss is an untimely and deeply personal and singular experience. Nobody can help you go through it more easily or understand all the emotions that you're going through. But others can be there for you to help comfort you through this process. The best thing that you can do is allow yourself to feel the grief as it comes over you. Resisting it will only prolong the natural process of healing. So just let those emotions and everything work over you. It's okay to cry if you lost a loved one. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay even to get into a depression. Although at certain points, there may be times when you might seek medical assistance from a doctor or from your pastor or for a counselor or whatever. Make sure that you absolutely keep a hold of your emotions and keep them in check and everything. Um, and so pretty much just this is what I want to tell you. Just kind of encourage you guys that if you are going through the loss of a loved one or a pet or an animal, the feelings that you're having right now are very normal and they're natural, and they are compensating your body and your mind actually has to go through these emotions and these processes to comprehend everything and process everything. So give yourself some time, and you're going to get through this situation. You really are. Have that personal friend that's really close to you. Have people that you can associate with, people that you can gather around. It's never good to be alone. You want to be with somebody a lot of times. There are times when we need to be alone to process our grief, but there's also times when we need to have people with us, our loved ones that can comfort us. And also your pastor, your priest, or your counselor, or anybody else that can give you assistance also is much needed too, of course. So, but I want to also emphasize one last thing before we leave is the 5 stages of grief. They're all these are all attributes that Ms. Ross had identified and everything, but you don't necessarily have to go through these stages to feel that you can process your grief in this kind of way. You process your grief in the way that you know how to do it, not a pre-planned formula that somebody else has laid out for you and everything. So if you experience some, all, or none of these stages that I talked about, that's okay. You know, you process things the way that you want to process them or whatever. Um, like in her later years, Miss Ross had wrote that she regretted writing the stages the way that she did, that people mistook them as being both linear and universal. Based on what she observed while working with patients given terminal diagnoses, Ms. Ross identified the 5 common experiences, not 5 required experiences. Her stages, whether applied to the dying or those left living, were meant to normalize and validate what some might experience in the swirl of insanity that is loss and grief and death. The stages of grief are not meant to tell you what to feel, what you should feel, and exactly, you know, and when exactly you should feel it. They are not meant to dictate whether you are doing your grief correctly or not. They are meant to normalize a deeply not normal time. They were meant to give comfort. Miss Ross's work was meant as a kindness, not as a cage. So that's pretty much it. We'll also say that grief is the natural response when someone you love is torn from your life. It is a natural process. It is a process of the heart being smashed and broken open, of reality shifting and hurling in place, and it cares nothing for order or stages. The truth is, you can't force an order on pain. You can't make it tidy or predictable. These stages of grief are a net thrown over a fog bank, and they help neither to define nor contain. Um, to do grief well depends solely on individual experience. It means listening to your own reality. It means acknowledging pain and love and loss. And it means allowing the truth of these things the space to exist without any artificial tethers or stages or requirements. Um, Here are a few things, last things to remember on the process of grief. Number one, there is no finish line. This is not a race. Grief has its own lifespan, unique to you. There is no time when pain and grief are completed. You grieve because you love, and love is part of you. Love changes, but it does not